Hi, I'm Hannah, and if you've ever felt like you were giving everything, pouring your heart and soul into something, or someone, only to be overlooked, undervalued, or actively undermined by the people who were supposed to love and support you the most, well, then maybe you'll understand what I'm about to share. I'm 36, living in Hamburg, which is a beautiful city, really, full of canals and history, but for a long time, it felt like a cage. Not the city itself, of course, but the life I was living here, the expectations I was carrying. My story isn't unique, I know that. It's the quiet story so many women carry, the one where you're the capable one, the reliable one, the one everyone leans on. You fix things, you smooth things over, you anticipate needs before anyone even voices them. You make yourself smaller, quieter, easier to manage, all for the sake of keeping the peace, for keeping things together. And you do it because you love these people, because they are your family, your closest circle. You believe in the inherent goodness, the reciprocal nature of those bonds, even when the evidence starts to pile up against it. For years, I was the bedrock my family built their lives on, financially and emotionally. I was the unseen scaffolding holding up their convenience, their comfort, their expectations. While I was busy building a career, quietly achieving things many of them didn't even fully grasp, my deepest struggle wasn't in the demanding world of business. It was in the suffocating dynamics of my own home, my own flesh and blood. It was the slow, insidious realization that the people I loved weren't just taking my contributions for granted, they were actively exploiting them, treating my generosity not as a gift, but as a right, an obligation. There were moments, little pinpricks of pain over the years, that hinted at the truth. Times when my achievements were met with faint praise or immediately overshadowed by someone else's minor success. Times when I offered help, and it was taken not with gratitude, but with an air of expectation, as if I was finally doing what I was supposed to do. Times when I needed help myself, needed support, and found excuses or indifference instead. But I pushed them down, these moments. I told myself I was being sensitive, that family was complicated, that love meant sacrifice. Especially for women, right? We're practically born knowing how to make ourselves secondary. But the truth is, there's a line between sacrifice and self-annihilation. There's a difference between supporting the people you love and being used by them until you disappear. And for me, that line was finally crossed in a way that felt like a physical blow, a betrayal so complete and so absolute that it shattered the carefully constructed world I'd been living in. It was the moment I stopped hoping things would get better, stopped making excuses, and started seeing the reality of the dynamic I was trapped in. This is the story of how that happened. How the quiet, reliable Hannah, the one who always said yes, was finally pushed to say no. How I learned that sometimes walking away from the people who hurt you the most is the bravest, most loving thing you can do for yourself. It's not a comfortable story. Parts of it are still raw, even now. But it's my story, and it's the story of how I finally found my own ground to stand on. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It always helps to feel less alone. Now, let me take you back to how it all began. I had always been the quiet one, the one who got things done without fuss. Growing up, that translated into being the responsible older sister. My brother, Lucas, was 3 years younger, charming, restless, and the undisputed golden child of our parents. He had a spark, a natural charisma that drew people in, while I was content in my books, meticulously organizing my colored pencils, finding comfort in order and predictability. My parents, bless them, adored Lucas. His every whim was indulged, his minor achievements celebrated like national holidays. My own successes, though academically and later professionally significant, were met with a nod, maybe a brief well done, before the conversation inevitably swung back to Lucas's latest adventure or challenge. It wasn't malicious, not initially, it was just the way things were. Lucas needed more support, more guidance, which often translated into financial bailouts, Connections pulled, problems smoothed over. My needs were simpler, or so they seemed. I studied hard, got scholarships, worked part-time to pay for my own things early on. I was independent, capable. These were framed as virtues, but in hindsight, they were also the reasons I became invisible. The less I needed, the less I was seen. The more capable I was, the more was expected of me for the benefit of others, while less was ever given to me. After university, I landed a job at a respectable firm in Hamburg, building a career in client management. I was good at it. I had a knack for understanding people, for anticipating their needs, for building trust. My clients stayed with me. My portfolio grew. I was proud of what I was building, piece by painstaking piece. Meanwhile, Lucas drifted through various ventures, each one requiring an initial investment from our parents, each one failing to truly take off. He'd call me sometimes, not to ask how I was, but to complain about his struggles, to hint at needing help, or just to regale me with tales of his latest grand plan, always just on the cusp of success. I'd listen, offer quiet encouragement, sometimes send him a bit of money when he was particularly strapped, money I'd saved diligently. It felt like part of my duty, part of being the responsible sister. My relationship with my parents was a complex tapestry of obligation and unexpressed longing. I visited them every Sunday for dinner, a ritual that felt less like a warm family gathering and more like a performance where I played the role of the supportive, successful daughter who wasn't any trouble. I'd help my mother with the dishes, listen to my father talk about his investments, and endure the inevitable, lengthy updates on Lucas's life. My own life, my work successes, my small apartment, my quiet hobbies, they were all secondary, briefly acknowledged footnotes in the main narrative of the family. Lucas. The financial exploitation started subtly. A request to co-sign a lease for Lucas when he wanted a nicer apartment than he could afford. A loan for a car, with a promise to pay me back that evaporated into the ether. Covering expenses for family events because Hannah has a good job, she can afford it. My parents would frame it as helping family, as pooling resources. It felt uncomfortable, a constant drain, but saying no felt worse. It felt like letting the family down, like being selfish. And selfish was the one thing I absolutely could not be in the script of my life. I had to be the good daughter, the good sister. The emotional exploitation was harder to name, but more damaging. It was the expectation that I would always be available, always listen, always support, without receiving the same in return. It was being the default chauffeur, the default problem solver, the default emotional punching bag when things weren't going well, particularly with Lucas. My feelings, my stress, my exhaustion, they were invisible. There was an unspoken hierarchy of needs, and mine were always at the bottom. Lucas's happiness, my parents' peace of mind, which seemed directly tied to Lucas's state, these were the priorities. My role was to facilitate them. The patterns were so ingrained, so normalized over decades, that I barely questioned them. This was just family, wasn't it? This was love, in its imperfect, messy form. The quiet suffering, the feeling of being perpetually depleted. I thought that was just adulthood, just life. I saw friends with different family dynamics, families that seemed to function on mutual respect and support, and ached with a silent envy I couldn't articulate. What was wrong with me? Why did my family feel so different, so transactional? The first major crack appeared not in my family life, but at work, strangely enough. I had been working towards a promotion for years, putting in extra hours, exceeding targets, building the firm's biggest accounts from scratch. Each time a senior position opened, I applied. I was told I was a strong candidate, and each time, the promotion went to someone else. The fourth time, it went to a young man, fresh out of a fancy business school, who had been at the firm for less than a year. He was charming, smooth-talking, great at presenting flashy ideas, but he didn't have the deep client relationships or the foundational work that I did. When I asked my boss for feedback, expecting the usual platitudes, he mentioned, client optics, a new direction, and, devastatingly, that I was so good where you are, that moving me felt like a disruption. It felt eerily similar to the unspoken message from my family. You are most valuable to us exactly where you are, serving our needs, not pursuing your own growth. That blocked promotion wasn't the core betrayal of my story, but it was a catalyst. It was the moment I realized that my quiet competence, my dedication to the foundational work, wasn't always valued in the way I thought it should be. It made me question my assumptions about reward and recognition. If I could be overlooked and dismissed in a professional environment where performance was supposedly objective, what did that say about my personal life, where the rules were subjective, dictated by emotion and history? I didn't cause a scene at the firm. I didn't yell or protest. I quit quietly. It felt like a release, severing a cord that had bound me to a place where I was no longer growing. Starting my own agency was terrifying and exhilarating. I poured every ounce of my energy into it, drawing on the skills I'd honed over a decade. I worked harder than ever, but this time, it was for myself. And within a year, many of my old clients followed me, drawn by the relationships we'd built, the trust I'd earned. My ex-boss reportedly had no idea who was poaching his biggest accounts. There was a quiet satisfaction in that, a sense of reclaiming my own value. Building my business gave me a new perspective, a new source of strength that wasn't dependent on external validation, certainly not from my family. I was so focused on surviving and then thriving in my new venture that I initially didn't change the family dynamic much. I was still the reliable daughter, the helpful sister. The Sunday dinners continued. The requests for help, financial and otherwise, still came, but the suppressed resentment was growing. The physical exhaustion of building a business was compounded by the emotional drain of maintaining the facade of the happy, compliant family member. The true inciting incident, the one that finally broke me open, arrived on a cold November afternoon. My parents owned a holiday apartment by the coast, a place they'd always said would be for both Lucas and me eventually. It wasn't a grand estate, but it held memories, and represented a small piece of shared future. I'd contributed significantly to its maintenance over the years, paying for repairs, new furniture, even covering the property taxes for periods when my parents were tight on cash, which usually coincided with Lucas needing another bailout. I did it willingly, or at least, I told myself I did. It was family property, after all, part of our collective security. Lucas had recently decided he wanted to get married. His fiancée, Clara, was lovely, bright, and came from a family with considerable means. Suddenly, Lucas, who had struggled financially for years, was talking about buying a house, starting a family in earnest. My parents were over the moon. The wedding planning became the new focal point of family conversations, even more dominant than Lucas's usual exploits. One Sunday, over Kaffee und Kuchen, my father cleared his throat, looking unusually serious. My mother wrung her hands slightly. Lucas was there too, unusually quiet, picking at his cake. I felt a familiar tension settle in the air, the kind that usually preceded a family discussion that involved me being asked for something. "Hannah," my father began, his tone gentle but firm, "we need to talk about the apartment." My heart sank slightly. Had something gone wrong with it? More repairs needed? "Yes, Papa," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "Well," he continued, glancing at my mother, "with Lucas getting married, starting a family, they'll need a solid foundation, you understand." I nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. "Clara's family is helping them with a deposit for a house," my mother added, finally looking up. "A very generous amount." "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely happy for Lucas. "I'm so glad he's finding stability." "Yes, yes." My father hurried on. "But property is expensive here. Even with help, they need a bit more to get the place they really want. A place fitting for Clara's family, you see." My stomach clenched. The way they said Clara's family, the implication of needing to measure up. "So," my father took a breath. We've decided the best thing is to sell the coastal apartment. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Sell it? The place they'd promised would be for both of us? The place I'd sunk my own money into for years? Sell it? I repeated, the polite facade cracking. But why, I thought. Hannah, be reasonable. My mother interjected softly, her eyes pleading. It's the most sensible thing. It's sitting empty much of the time. The market is good right now. And the money, my father finished, his voice gaining a note of finality. The money from the sale will go to Lucas and Clara to help them buy their house. Silence fell like a shroud. My cutlery felt impossibly heavy in my hand. The afternoon sun, which moments before had seemed warm, now felt cold and distant. To Lucas. I managed, the words barely a whisper. My voice felt thick, as if I were speaking through cotton. Yes, dear, my mother said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming tinged with that familiar, subtle guilt, tripping I knew so well. He needs it so much more than you do. You're so successful, you have your own place. Lucas is just starting out, he's building a future. Lucas, who had been given every advantage, every safety net, every hand up since birth, was just starting out? Lucas, who had frittered away every opportunity, every investment from our parents. And I, who had built my life independently, who had contributed to that very apartment, I was being told I didn't need it, that my years of quiet support, including financial support for that specific property, counted for nothing? But I've put money into that apartment, I said, my voice trembling now. For years. Repairs, taxes. Oh, Hannah, that was just helping out the family, my father said, waving a dismissive hand. We all pitch in. That wasn't an investment expecting a return. An investment expecting a return. The cold, hard truth laid bare. My contributions were not investments. They were expected, invisible, unvalued labor and money, simply absorbed into the family system to benefit the favored child. The promise of the apartment, the shared future, was a lie, or perhaps it had only ever applied to Lucas. My mother added, her voice sweet but edged with steel. You wouldn't want to stand in the way of your brother's happiness, would you, Hannah? He needs this to get a proper start. There it was, the ultimate weapon, guilt. The implication that my mere existence, my silent claim to a share of something I had helped maintain, was an obstacle to Lucas's shining future. My needs, my feelings, my history of contribution, they were all secondary to Lucas's proper start. I looked at Lucas. He still wasn't looking at me, tracing patterns on the tablecloth with his finger. He didn't defend me, didn't acknowledge my contributions, didn't seem to feel any discomfort at the blatant unfairness of it all. His silence was complicity. It struck me then, with the force of a physical blow, that he wasn't just passively benefiting from the favoritism. He accepted it as his due. He saw nothing wrong with this picture. A hot, bitter wave washed over me. It wasn't just the money or the apartment itself. It was the casual dismissal of my years of loyalty, my quiet support, my financial contributions. It was the stark, undeniable proof that in my family, I was not seen as an equal, not loved unconditionally, but valued only for what I could provide, and only then, up to the point where my needs conflicted with Lucas's. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I didn't trust myself to speak. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the familiar scene of the dining room. Tears of shock, of pain, of a deep, searing injustice that went bone deep. I can't, I choked out, the words barely audible. I can't do this. Hannah, sit down, my father said, his tone now laced with irritation. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic? The word ripped through me. Was that what they saw? Not hurt, not betrayal, but drama. You're selling something I helped pay for years, something you promised me to give all the money to Lucas, and you tell me not to be dramatic? My mother's face hardened. Hannah, that's not fair. We've done so much for you. Like what? I heard myself ask, the suppressed questions of a lifetime bubbling to the surface. Like expecting me to solve all your problems? Like always putting Lucas first? Like pretending I don't exist unless you need something? Lucas finally looked up, a flicker of annoyance on his face. Hannah, come on. It's just a holiday flat. Get over it. Just a holiday flat. His words were like a final twist of the knife. It wasn't just a flat. It was the symbol of my invisibility, the physical manifestation of their dismissiveness. It was everything I had quietly contributed, erased with a wave of a hand because the golden boy needed more. No, Lucas, I said, my voice surprisingly steady now, though my body still trembled. I won't get over it, not this time. I grabbed my coat and bag, fumbling slightly with the strap. My parents looked stunned, then annoyed. They weren't used to me deviating from the script, especially not with this much intensity. Hannah, where are you going? My mother asked, her voice tight. I don't know, I replied honestly, but I can't stay here. And I walked out. I left the uneaten cake, the lukewarm coffee, the shattered pieces of the family facade scattered on the dining table. I got into my car and drove, not knowing where I was going, tears streaming down my face, the world outside a blur of gray and red taillights. The pain was physical, a deep ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. It was the pain of 40 years of suppressed emotions finally erupting, the pain of seeing the people you loved most reveal the true, cold nature of their regard for you. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a small hotel, a place I'd never been. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the impersonal art on the wall, feeling utterly adrift. My phone buzzed with messages from my parents, first demanding I come back, then accusing me of overreacting, then shifting to a sorrowful, "We're so worried about you, how could you do this to us?" There was nothing from Lucas. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The sheer exhaustion of pretending, of carrying the weight of their expectations, had finally crushed me. I felt empty, hollowed out. The carefully built identity of good daughter, good sister lay in ruins, and I had no idea who I was without it. The silence of the hotel room was deafening, a stark contrast to the constant noise and demands of my family life. The next few weeks were a blur of pain and confusion. I went to work, functioning on autopilot, my mind replaying the scene at my parents' house, turning over every dismissed contribution, every overlooked need, every moment of subtle favoritism. I felt a profound sense of shame, not for leaving, but for having stayed so long, for having allowed myself to be treated that way, for having believed the illusion. How could I have been so blind? So desperate for their approval that I sacrificed my own well-being? My parents called and texted, their messages oscillating between trying to guilt-trip me. Your mother isn't sleeping. You're making her ill, and attempting to rug sweep. Let's just put this behind us, we're family. Lucas sent one message weeks later. Seriously, Hannah? Still sulking? Grow up. His absolute lack of empathy, his entitlement, was breathtaking. I didn't go to the Sunday dinners. I stopped taking their calls consistently. The initial silence from my end was accidental, born of shock and pain. Then it became deliberate. I needed space to breathe, to think, to simply feel without being told my feelings were wrong or inconvenient. A friend, Sarah, noticed something was deeply wrong. She was an old university friend, kind and straightforward. When I finally, hesitantly, started to tell her what had happened, the floodgates opened. I poured out the years of hidden pain, the constant feeling of not being enough, the financial and emotional drain, the final, brutal betrayal of the apartment. She listened patiently, without judgment, her eyes filled with compassion. Hannah, she said softly when I finally ran out of words, exhausted and tearful. That's not a family, that's a system. And it's a system that's been using you. Her words were simple, but they resonated deeply. A system, not a family. The word system felt objective, analytical. It allowed me to see the dynamics not as personal failures or unfortunate circumstances, but as a patterned, toxic structure. She recommended a therapist, someone who specialized in family dynamics and trauma. Hesitantly, I made an appointment. Therapy was hard. It meant revisiting all the painful memories, the buried resentments, the years of telling myself I was okay when I wasn't. But it was also incredibly healing. My therapist, Dr. Klein, was everything I needed. Calm, insightful, validating. She helped me see the patterns clearly: the narcissistic tendencies, the triangulation, the financial abuse disguised as familial help, the weaponization of guilt. She helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for their behavior, only for my own reaction to it. She helped me see that my years of trying to earn their love and approval had been a futile exercise, because their dynamic wasn't about love, it was about control and convenience. The concept of boundaries was revolutionary to me. I had none. My life, my time, my resources, they had all been completely permeable, open for my family to walk in and take as they pleased. Dr. Klein explained that boundaries weren't walls built to keep people out, but fences built to keep me in, to protect my own space, energy, and well-being. It was terrifying to contemplate setting them, especially with my family, who reacted to any assertion of my needs as a personal attack. Slowly, tentatively, I started to practice. I stopped answering calls immediately. I declined invitations that felt draining. I stopped offering financial help. Each small step felt like a monumental act of defiance, accompanied by waves of guilt and fear. My family's reactions were predictable: increased pressure, emotional outbursts, attempts to make me feel guilty or question my sanity. "You've changed, Hannah," my mother would lament. "You used to be so loving." Meaning, you used to be so compliant. The holiday apartment was sold quickly. I received no notification, no share of the proceeds. I saw a picture on Lucas's social media of him and Clara standing in front of a new house, a congratulatory caption from my parents. It hurt, a fresh wave of pain, but it also solidified my resolve. This was the reality. They had made their choice, and I needed to make mine. The turning point came several months after I walked out. It was Lucas's wedding. An invitation arrived, formal and impersonal. For days, I agonized. Should I go? Should I pretend everything was fine? Would it be worse to go, or to stay away? The thought of facing them, of smiling and making small talk, of witnessing the family unit acting as if nothing had happened, made me feel physically ill. Dr. Klein helped me see that attending would be a betrayal of myself. It would signal to them that their behavior was acceptable, that I was willing to return to the fold and resume my role as the compliant daughter. It would be going against everything I was learning about self-worth and boundaries. I decided not to go. It was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made. I wrote a short, simple card to Lucas and Clara, wishing them well, and sent a modest gift from their registry. To my parents, I sent nothing, said nothing about my decision beforehand. I knew any explanation would be met with manipulation and attempts to change my mind. The calls and texts that followed were vicious. My mother was distraught, heartbroken, devastated that I would abandon the family on such an important day. My father was angry, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, trying to ruin Lucas's happiness. Lucas himself sent a series of furious messages, calling me bitter and jealous. Reading their words, I felt a strange mix of pain and liberation. The pain was the confirmation of their true feelings, the complete lack of understanding or remorse. The liberation was in seeing their manipulation so clearly, in knowing that their anger stemmed not from my wrongdoing, but from my refusal to play my assigned part. I didn't reply to any of them. I blocked their numbers for a while, just to give myself peace. The confrontation wasn't a single explosive argument, it was a series of smaller acts of boundary setting, culminating in my absence from the wedding. But the most direct confrontation happened a few weeks later, when my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door, surprised to see her standing there, looking smaller and older than I remembered. My first instinct was the old programming. Invite her in, offer her tea, smooth things over. But Dr. Klein's words echoed in my mind. Protect your space. Mother? I said, keeping my voice neutral. What are you doing here? She pushed past me slightly, entering the hallway. I came to see you, Hannah. We need to talk, properly. I closed the door, leaning against it for a moment to steady myself. This was it. The moment to use my voice. We can talk, I said, my voice clearer now. But not in here. We can go to a cafe. She looked taken aback. She had expected to walk in, take control of the space, dictate the terms. A cafe? Hannah, this is ridiculous. I'm your mother. And this is my home, I replied gently but firmly. I prefer to keep certain things separate. Let's go to the cafe on the corner. Reluctantly, she agreed. We sat at a small table, the noise of the cafe providing a buffer. She immediately launched into a monologue about the wedding, how sad it was that I wasn't there, how much she missed me, how I was breaking her heart. The classic guilt trip. I listened for a few minutes, then held up a hand. Mother, stop. That's not what this is about. She looked surprised, her expression shifting from pained to annoyed. What do you mean? Of course it is, you abandoned us. I didn't abandon you, I said, choosing my words carefully. I took space for myself, because I was hurting. Hurting, she scoffed lightly. Because of the apartment? Hannah, that's such an overreaction. It wasn't about the apartment, I said, feeling a surge of strength as I spoke my truth. It was about what it represented. Years of feeling like my contributions didn't matter, like I only existed to serve Lucas's needs or your convenience. It was about the favoritism, the financial exploitation, the emotional neglect. Her eyes widened slightly. She wasn't used to me naming it so directly. Exploitation? Neglect? Hannah, how can you say that? We gave you everything. You gave me a roof over my head and food, I conceded. And I'm grateful for that. But you also took. You took my money, my time, my emotional energy, without ever asking if I had anything left for myself. You praised my independence, but relied on it completely, while constantly propping up Lucas. When I needed support, you were unavailable or made it about you. That is not a healthy dynamic. That is completely unfair, she cried, drawing the attention of a few people nearby. We loved you. We love you. Lucas needed more help, he was struggling. And I wasn't? I asked, the question hanging in the air. I was working full-time, building a business, dealing with my own stress. Did anyone ever ask me how I was doing? Did anyone ever offer to help me? She looked away, flustered. Well, you always seemed so capable, Hannah. You never asked. Because asking felt like a burden, I said, the old pain surfacing. Because I learned early on that my needs were less important. That my value came from being the easy one, the one who didn't cause problems, the one who just quietly handled everything. This is crazy, she muttered, shaking her head. This is all in your head. You're imagining things. The gaslighting. I recognized it immediately. Dr. Klein had prepared me for this. I'm not imagining it, Mother, I said firmly. It's real. It's how I've felt for years, and the apartment. Giving the entire sale to Lucas, after I contributed so much, that was the final straw. It showed me exactly where I stood. He needed it more, she insisted, back to the familiar script. That's your perception, I countered. My perception is that you chose his need over mine, again. And you dismissed my contribution completely. So what do you want, Hannah? She asked, her voice cold now. The mask of hurt mother slipping to reveal the controlling parent underneath. Do you want us to apologize? Do you want money? I don't want money, I said, surprised at how true that felt. The money from the apartment was tainted now. I want to be seen. I want my feelings to be acknowledged. I want the dynamic to change. She stared at me, a look of disbelief on her face. The dynamic? What dynamic? We're a family. A family shouldn't make one member responsible for the well-being of others at their own expense. I stated clearly, a family should operate on mutual respect and support. We haven't had that. Well, if that's how you feel, she said, standing up abruptly, then maybe you just don't understand what family is. Maybe I finally do, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. Maybe family isn't just about blood. Maybe it's about how people treat you. She left the cafe without another word. I stayed there for a long time, sipping cold coffee, the tremors finally starting in my hands. It had been terrifying, but I had done it. I had spoken my truth, named the dynamic, set a boundary. I hadn't collapsed. I hadn't backed down. It felt like a small victory in a long, exhausting war. The fallout from that conversation was immense. My parents retreated into wounded silence, occasionally punctuated by angry emails from my father or tearful voicemails from my mother that I didn't return. Lucas remained hostile. The family system was reacting strongly to the disruption I had introduced. I had dared to step off the merry-go-round, and they were furious that it was wobbling. For a while I felt immense grief. Grief for the family I never truly had, grief for the wasted years, grief for the lost hope of a different future. There was a profound loneliness in realizing that the people who were supposed to be my closest allies were, in fact, the source of my deepest pain. The Sunday dinners, the family gatherings, they were gone, replaced by a quiet void. But into that void, new things began to grow. With the massive drain of their emotional and financial needs removed, I had more energy, more time, more mental clarity. My business continued to thrive. I invested in myself, taking courses, joining professional networks. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, explaining, hesitantly at first, the situation with my family. Their support was a lifeline. They saw me, the real me, the one my family had overlooked for so long. I continued therapy, processing the trauma, learning how to reparent myself, how to give myself the validation and acceptance I had craved from my parents. I learned that my worth was inherent, not conditional on my usefulness to others. I was enough, just as I was. Setting boundaries became easier with practice. I established clear rules for any future contact with my family, if there was any. No discussions about money. No enabling Lucas. No guilt-tripping. No dwelling on the past in a way that dismissed my feelings. I communicated these boundaries calmly but firmly when necessary, usually in writing to avoid circular arguments. Their reactions were varied: anger, disbelief, wounded silence. But I held firm. I had learned the cost of not holding firm. Sometimes, the silence from them was deafening. Holidays came and went without contact. It hurt, a sharp, familiar ache of rejection. But beneath the hurt was a growing sense of peace. The peace of not walking on eggshells, of not anticipating the next request, the next dismissal, the peace of owning my own life. I started doing things just for me. I joined a hiking group. I took up painting, something I'd loved as a child but abandoned because it wasn't productive enough. I traveled alone, exploring places I'd always wanted to see. Each new experience was a brick in the foundation of my new identity, an identity built on my own terms, not on the expectations of others. Lucas had a child, a daughter. I received an announcement, but no personal call or invitation to visit. It felt strange, like reading about strangers. The new house, the baby, the life my parents had worked so hard to facilitate for him, it was all happening, but I was no longer a part of it. And that was okay. More than okay. It was necessary. My relationship with my parents exists now only on the most superficial level, maintained with extreme caution and strict boundaries. Phone calls are short, infrequent, and focused only on neutral topics. Visits are rare, brief, and always in public places. Any attempt to slip into old patterns is immediately shut down. It's not a warm relationship. It's not the Hallmark movie ideal of family. But it's honest, and it's safe. I haven't seen Lucas in years. We have no relationship. The boy who was my brother, the man who saw nothing wrong with taking what wasn't his and dismissing my pain, I have no space for that in my life anymore. It's not bitterness, it's self-preservation. Building my business, building my life, felt like building a house on solid ground after years of living in a structure built on sand. The stability I found in my work was a mirror for the emotional stability I was finding within myself. I learned that my capability was a strength to be used for my own empowerment, not a tool for others' convenience. My empathy was a gift to be shared with those who valued it, not a weakness to be exploited. The scars are still there, of course. Betrayal by family leaves deep marks. There are moments of sadness, of longing for the idealized family I wished I had. But they pass. They are overshadowed by the quiet pride I feel in myself. Pride for surviving, for breaking the cycle, for choosing myself even when it felt terrifyingly wrong. I used to think my value was in how much I could do for others, how much I could sacrifice, how much I could endure in silence. Now I know my value is inherent. It's in my strength, my resilience, my capacity for joy, my ability to build a life that nourishes me. I am no longer the quiet, suffering daughter, the invisible sister. I am Hannah, the woman who reclaimed herself. The woman who learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential. And sometimes, the most powerful act of self-love is walking away from the people who are incapable of loving you the way you deserve. It was a long, painful journey from the stifling Sunday dinners and the dismissed contributions to where I stand today. There were moments I thought I wouldn't make it, moments the grief and anger felt too overwhelming. But piece by piece, boundary by boundary, I rebuilt my life. I learned that the end of a toxic relationship, even a familial one, isn't a failure. It can be the beginning of something new, something healthier, something that is truly yours. The cost of silence was my self-worth. The price of breaking free was initially high, but the return has been priceless. I lost a family, but I found myself. And that, it turns out, was the most important discovery of all. I learned that I didn't need their approval to be whole, or their validation to be worthy. My worth was never tied to their perception of me. It was always inside me, waiting for me to finally see it. I still live in Hamburg. It still has canals and history, but it no longer feels like a cage. It feels like home, my home, built on my terms. So that's my story, or at least a significant part of it. Sharing it feels both vulnerable and empowering. It's strange, the way the deepest hurts often come from the people who are supposed to protect you, isn't it? The patterns of exploitation, of being overlooked, they can feel so normal, so ingrained, that you don't even see them until something shatters the illusion. For me, it was the apartment, the blatant disregard for my contribution, the prioritization of my brother's needs over mine, again and again. Finding the courage to say enough, to set boundaries, was the hardest thing I've ever done. It felt like breaking sacred rules, like being fundamentally wrong. The guilt was immense. But staying would have cost me everything. It would have cost me my peace, my self-respect, my very identity. Leaving was an act of self-preservation, an act of self-love. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about saving myself. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates with you, if you felt unseen, undervalued, or exploited by people you love, know that you are not alone. It's a difficult path, untangling yourself from those dynamics. There will be pain, there will be guilt, there will be moments of doubt. But there is also the possibility of healing, of reclaiming your space, your energy, your voice. You are worthy of being treated with respect and kindness. Your needs matter, your feelings are valid. Learning to prioritize myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary for my survival and my growth. It's okay to say no, it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to walk away from relationships, even family relationships, that are damaging to your well-being. Your peace is paramount. Your self-worth is non-negotiable. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, please consider giving this video a like. It helps more people find it. And if you want to hear more about my journey, or share some of yours, you can subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. Knowing I'm not alone, and that maybe my story can help someone else feel less alone, means the world to me. Take care of yourselves, you deserve it.